As many of you know, I just came back from visiting Israel as a part of the South Bay Solidarity Mission that gathered a group of 19 members of our community at large, among them 4 rabbis, the JCRC director, the founder of the organization Unacceptable, and 9 members of our own Shir Hadash, one sitting right there. Seen anybody? No. The sentiment of the journey was clear. We wanted to show up, share love, and participate in the pain of our beloved people. The goals were to bear witness, to comfort the mourners, to visit the sick, to stand in solidarity, and to tell the story. In one way or another, all these goals were accomplished, at least at an initial level. There is still much to do. And so, on Saturday night, as soon as I got into the airplane, I started thinking about this moment and what I was going to share when I have the opportunity to tell the story. It didn't come straightforward, and so I thought I might be tired. Rested a bit, kept pushing, and nothing. It took me a few days to realize that I didn't know what story to tell. During our visit, we had the immense privilege to come in touch with many people. Most of them thanked us from the bottom of their hearts for being there. They all graciously shared their experiences with us, and many of them asked from us to share the story. And here I was, not knowing what story I should share, I should tell. At some point, I realized that while for the diverse composition of the people we met, the recollection of the events that took place on October 7th was the same. Their narratives were very different. A narrative is our personal interpretation or story of events encompassing our understanding of the causes, our processing of the experience, our interpretation of the effects, and our vision of the future implications. The narratives we heard can straightforwardly track to some of the different perspectives we hear in Israeli politics, and so to the dialogues taking place among American Jews. All these experiences are authentic and truthful, but when narratives are articulated, they take political forms. Well, we are currently immersed and united in what the psalmist calls Emek Abacha, the valley of tears. We are also detached and divided at a dangerous political intersection. So first and foremost, let me share my biases. I will share my biases with you, and then a series of things that I believe to be true. I love the state of Israel. I love the Jewish people. I love what Judaism stands for and our values. I love our tradition. I don't always love how these values come through and the decisions the government of the State of Israel makes for the sake of these values. I appreciate the work of some politicians in the current administration, but in general, I do not appreciate our current coalition and administration. And so, with all the biases out, here are the truths that I was able to gather, or as I was able to gather them. Before October 7th, until October 6th, we had a political divide in the Israeli society. A huge conflict over what we called what was called the judicial reform, that was understood by many of us as a judicial overhaul. It is true, we were deeply divided. On October 7th, the brutal attack of a despicable enemy brought us together. It is true that October 7th exposed us to a level of violence that was beyond the most diabolic nightmare. You would think that murder is evil enough, but the attack was beyond that. We experienced torture, sexual harassment, and rape, mutilation, and abduction. It is incomprehensible, but it is true. It is true that on October 8th, a terrible war started. A war to reclaim the sovereignty of the State of Israel that was undermined on October 7th. It is true. Many hostages were taken. Families are praying for the return of their beloved ones, children and adults as one. It is true that there is a divide regarding what is the most immediate priority, the absolute defeat of Hamas or the release of the hostages at a high for some, too high for others, whatever it takes, price through diplomatic channels. There is a third take that asks, are these two goals in contradiction with each other? It is true that this topic is not new for us Jews, and that our tradition discusses the utmost importance of releasing captives, and at the same time, the limitations regarding how far we are willing to go for that goal. For God's sake, we must be the only tradition in the entire world that says every single day a blessing for the release of captives. In the daily miracles in Birkot HaShachar, Baruch Matir Asurim, blessed is the one who releases the captives. Our enemies know how much we value freedom, how much we value life. And therefore, there is a very strong opinion in Jewish law that for the sake of Tikkun Olam, from all things, for the sake of Tikkun Olam, one shouldn't pay unreasonable amounts for the release of captives. Pidyom Shvuim, the release of captives, as this would nurture something that is essentially flawed and broken. It is true, this argument exists in the Israeli government and society today. And we heard it. It is true that many in the Israeli society believe that the government that led us to this situation cannot lead us out of it. And so the demonstrations in Kaplan Street restarted asking for an election. It is also true that the Prime Minister Netanyahu said this week in a discourse that an election in Israel would mean to fulfill the desire of Nasrallah, who is the head of Hezbollah, and Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza. In the same breath, he called for unity. It is also true that, in the opinion of many, the survival of this government means the perishing of our captives. It is also true that we met people that believed that what happened to us was inevitable because of our enemy, and that the government before and after the attack was and is doing its best to protect the society. This wasn't an uncommitted take, what we heard. We heard that from a rabbi who lost, between friends and students, 10 people in the streets of his village, fighting to defend their homes. It is true that Israelis every single day see the news with pictures of fallen soldiers, the stories of people that were murdered, and stories of survivors. It is true that it is difficult and almost impossible to move forward when there are still 134 captives and 200,000 people that have been displaced since the beginning of the war. Things are pretty messy in Israel. People have been in hotels for 4 months and a half. It is true that the reality of war is devastating on any side of the fence. It is also true and devastating to know that many in Israel and here in the United States don't have the emotional space to recognize the suffering on the other side. It is true that many of the questions we ask here in America are very important and real for us, but they are not necessarily representative of the experience of our Israeli siblings. Here and there, we all experience and are suffering from the consequences of October 7th, but the proximity, the distance to the epicenter of this explosion makes a difference. Concerns sound very different when you have an imminent worry for the life of your beloved ones. I want to share a quick side story. A story that I heard from my friend, Rabbi Hensfoni, about another rabbi friend who told this story to another group that was visiting Israel. Rabbi Rani Yager, as a child, was a young adult living at home, end of teenage years, and a messy teenager. And one night, by 12 a.m., he realizes his child is not back. He gets nervous. 2 a.m., he recognizes he's not back. He hasn't come back. He gets very nervous and sits in the couch to wait for his child. At 4 a.m., he hears like a very, very, very mild knock at the door. He opens the door, and there he is, his child. And Rani tells that he gets very, very upset. The child says, "I forgot the keys." And Rani says, "Once again." And he gets very, very upset, and his child says, "I'm sorry, Dad, but I didn't want you to have the experience of someone knocking at the door in the middle of the night." Because the meaning of someone knocking at the door in the middle of the night is that you are burying a beloved one. And that's the situation of thousands of families that have their children in the army. And that's the situation also with terrorism. And in the midst of this impossible situation, we met incredible people. People like the famous singer and activist Ahinoam Nini Noah, who told us that there is no alternative to peace, that there won't be a future to Israel without it. And at the same time, when we asked her about a ceasefire, she said, well, that's a very simplistic question. People like entrepreneur and peace activist Maoz Inon, who said that hope is something that needs to be built, and that we cannot look at the past in order to make peace. We need to look at the future, he explained. We need to figure out where we meet in the future and look forward. And it is particularly moving to hear that from someone whose parents, Bila and Yacovi Inon, Zichronan Lebracha, of blessed memory, were murdered on October 7th. Maoz believes that the war needs to stop now. We heard from the people of Saka, the organization that literally went to hell to rescue the destroyed bodies of our people. We learned it's a mostly ultra-Orthodox organization. We learned about their faith, their devotion and dedication. Nomi, one of the 10 women that volunteered in that organization, was presenting to us. She felt that the only way to have security and peace was to live for several years military presence in Gaza. Rabbi Rafi was confident in the ability of the government to protect us. Ronen, from Brothers and Sisters in Arms, believed that the civil society needed to provide for the needs of the public because the government was absolutely incapable. So many different stories about the story of what happened to us and how we continue, how we move from this moment. One of the most intellectually and emotionally moving things I heard came up in a conversation with Israeli thought leader Tomer Persiko. The conversation with him unveiled the influence of various societal factions and their visions for a Jewish state. Tomer explained that many of the policies that are taking place in Israel are led by extreme group within National Orthodoxy. And that group is gaining more and more and more power. And he said, well, generically speaking, he said, Orthodox Jews or religious Jews, and in that definition he didn't include Reform conservative Jews, right? We would be put under the definition of what is secular Jews, what are secular Jews in Israel. He said, well, that faction of the Israeli society has a very good definition for what's the meaning of being Jewish. And that's the definition that is taking over in the state of Israel. The difference with the other 45%, the liberal Jews, let's call them, or the secular Jews, as he called us, is that we haven't figured out a definition for what it means to be a Jew. We don't have a very strong definition. And therefore, the one that takes precedence is the one of the group that has one. I couldn't breathe. It reminded me of the very, very wise idea of the philosopher and the poet Ahad Ha'am, who said that national statehood for the Jews should be more than a state for the Jews, a Jewish state. A national entity for the Jews should be a Jewish state. And that's what's at the stake today. How to be a Jewish state, and there is a voice that is very absent. And so the definition of Judaism and how Jews act and think is being dictated by a different group or by a very specific group with very little discussion. In America, we reflect on these experiences and recognize the disparity, the variety, the diversity of perspectives, and also our own diversity, as we are also defined by proximity, also by distance. There are questions that are urgent questions to us that the Israeli society has no emotional space to ask and to entertain. Even those that are pacifists or even those that are not. Well, you would say that all Jews are pro-peace. We have very different definitions. We all sing Ose Shalom, but we have very different definitions of what that means. So what is in this for us? We American Jews need to keep working on defining what's the meaning of being Jews for us, and strengthen that definition, and strengthening our connection to the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And from that place, be active in offering content, in offering meaning to the question of what's the meaning of having a Jewish state. For years, we have thought of Israel, or many of us have thought of Israel as a state for the Jews, and it's time for us to offer support and strength and wisdom on increasing the definition, what's the meaning of having a Jewish state. I want to add two more thoughts. The pogrom, the horror of October 7th is incomparable. It's incomparable. I don't think that the world has seen something as cruel, as despicable as what we experience. And even in the midst of that pain, I think that there are two beacons of hope. One is that our people are showing up, that Jews in Israel, and not only Jews, also Muslims and Muslim Arabs and Christian Arabs, the Israeli society is showing up, advocating for the country they want to see, and Israel needs to change. None of Israel's mistakes, and there are many, and I'm very critical of the decision-making of the Israeli administrations, particularly over the last 20 years. But none of those mistakes justifies, by any means, what we are experiencing. And on the other hand, the existence of the state of Israel promises us that we will overcome this situation. We are experiencing a miracle. The state of Israel, imperfect as it is a miracle. Our people yearn for a national home for more than 2,000 years. And we are the privileged generation we are the generation that has the privilege to witness that national autonomy and to experience that imperfect but dreamed and yearned national autonomy. And the state of Israel is in a great crisis today. And it's messy. It's all over. And it's bleeding. So we need to do at least two things. One is to make sure that we are partners in the healing that Israel needs to experience. And that healing includes so many things that we need to offer. And the second one is that we show up with a strong definition of what it means for us to be Jews and to have a Jewish state. And we are partners in the conversation and hopefully in a healthy future for Medinat Israel, for the state of Israel, and for all the peoples around it, within the confines of the fence and on the other side of it. Shabbat Shalom.